welcome to Chaos2Cured podcast. You're here with Jeffrey Freed and Kirkpatrick Miller. We are going to be talking about a hot topic for any person that is dealing with mental health, and that is medication. So I'm not even going to drop a disclaimer. It's at the end. Please make sure you seek medical advice. Medication is a massive issue and a topic for any parent, any individual, any sibling, loved one. When you start, looking at, okay, I have this condition, it's been diagnosed. So let's just jump right in with some of this. Jeffrey, what is the degree of fear you see when dealing with young ones and when medication, just the word medication, is brought up?
It's different now. It used to be many parents were scared to death of medication, and they would claim that what they all thought that the child would get addicted, hooked, not be able to function if they are, on a during time period where they can't get the medication. And I've noticed lately that that's dissipated. They're still worried. I mean, there's still a bit of worry about that, but mostly now, people are so desperate for something that'll help that they seek out medication. Now, there is a core of people who really despise it, and usually their comments are, "Medication helps the symptoms. It does not. It doesn't get to the core reason why there's a problem." I kind of subscribe to that, no pun intended. Because, I mean, I know medication is necessary for some people. That's unarguable. But the reason so many people are on so much medication is because we live in a sick culture that, creates so much arrhythmia in terms of people's lives. People are overstressed. They're bombarded by terrible news. They're fearful for their children. They think there's going to be another pandemic. And if medication can get them to make the passing of life, or I guess what I really want to say is it'll ease your passage. And that's why so many people use it now. They're just so desperate. It's a sick culture. Medication can't help the culture. And so many people are on medication at this point that there's no point in railing against it, and it does help. That's the confusing thing about it. If it's given in the right quantity, at the right time, what happens is it can really, really help. For example, I work with most people I work with are on the spectrum. And one of the main problems, or the biggest cause of misery with people on the spectrum, I guess it's anxiety. Anxiety is brutal for people on the spectrum. It's paralyzing. And there's no arguing that if you take a medication that is good for anxiety, it will ameliorate those symptoms. And I don't think too many people would worry about what other people think or whether it's going to get them hooked. They just want relief because it can be so bad. It's a symptom of the disease being worse than the cure. It's usually the opposite, unfortunately.
But, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I was pretty much done. You go.
There's so many issues that I have with medication. And, we're doing this podcast to be open and be ourselves. So, I'm just going to shoot from the hip as far as this goes. I am so tired of, quote, medical experts. Again, this is not a slam on doctors or researchers. I have good friends and I love them, and they are amazing. I am tired of hearing people badmouth and shame certain medications. It is happening non-stop. So for me, having OCD, you talked about anxiety. There's different classes of medication. So if any of this is not accurate, again, listen to the disclaimer. But they use antidepressants for relieving anxiety. That they have beta blockers, so that control your heart from racing. And then they have benzodiazepines. There's some other ones as well. But let me jump into the first one. So that you have the antidepressants. I can give the best example. So an individual that I was in a relationship, to not give any of this away, had to take a massive test, very important for their career. Now, what happened was they had, massive anxiety, like you talked about, testing in the upper 98th percentile on all the practice tests. On the exam, it was like a massive failure. So brought up the idea of anxiety. Maybe you should go see a doctor, talk to them about it. They tried an SSRI. I have never seen somebody go, the first time they took the medication, the doctor, advised trying it a couple times beforehand, because you don't want to just try something new before doing a huge test. But they had no idea they were talking. They were always quiet, and all of a sudden they were just chatting away. What was interesting is the social anxiety was absolutely gone. When they went to take the test, same thing. Massive panic, failure. They said it was like a layer of film. Like they could see there was anxiety there, but they couldn't focus. So it actually made it a little worse. For the social aspect, they had no idea. So it was really interesting. So they tried beta blockers next, because you get a bunch of chances to take this test. You get, like, I think it's different depending on states. But the third one is beta blockers, or the second one. That very, very big struggle. Same thing. The comment was, as they were taking the test, they could feel their heart pounding. They could feel that the heart was staying slow, but the panic behind it didn't change. They failed that time as well. All of these had the same exact preparations, everything else. Nothing was different. The last time was with a benzodiazepine, and a very, very low dose, called within 30 minutes of taking the test, just said, oh yeah, I think it passed. I mean, got the results 2 days later, passed, with a very high score. So the reason I told that story is there's this huge movement against benzodiazepines and against other classes of medications that I have used in the past that work really well. So against amphetamines for ADHD. The reason for the benzodiazepine is there is some correlation between taking a benzodiazepine and dementia. So here's my problem, and I brought this up with any medical doctor, will give the same response. They will not be able to challenge this. There is no direct proof. There's no direct tie between that medication and dementia or Alzheimer's, but there is for stress. So the thing that drives me crazy is I have dealt with individuals where their doctor yanks them off a medication or guilts them off it. So this happened actually with my mom, and I am still angry about that because she has some of the same struggles that I do. So she was on a particular benzodiazepine, and she won't mind me sharing this story. She went in, she'd been dealing with the doctor for 5 years, coming down off the dose. The doctor retired, a new person came in, had her come in, take a drug test. First thing they had her do. They saw that medication. Oh, you need to take a drug test. We need to make sure you're actually taking it. My mom felt like she was, like, honestly a criminal. She stopped taking the medication cold. That medication is dangerous to stop. Yeah. If you do it, you can die. You can go into grand mal seizures. Not okay. So I do want to say this, anyone listening, never discontinue your medication without speaking to your doctor. So it's a serious issue, medical or medication shaming. And ticks me off, because a lot of times when I pointed that out to my doctor, I said, okay, what about stress? They're like, oh, that's a good point. I mean, if you look at it, there's tons and tons of data. You want to look at Alzheimer's or dementia or some serious health problems, look at stress. So if somebody is living on that outer edge, like we've talked about, where anxiety doesn't just touch their life, we're not talking about being a little nervous because you have to talk on stage. We're talking about, I have to take a test in 2 weeks and I can't sleep because I'm so worried. Yeah. So literally unable to think, unable to leave the house, unable to function.
I've seen it.
And as you know, when they have the ability to take medications that help, why are we trying to stop people from doing that? I get that there are concerns. I understand, but the whole purpose of a medication and a medical practice is to give the best results with the least amount of side effects. So this has been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. Same thing with the ADHD medication. The first time I was given dextroamphetamine, it's speed, right? So the doctor told me, listen, you're going to feel amped up. You're going to, you start with a small dose, right? It was actually a pretty decent dose because I'd been on, I'd been on other ones before. I'd tried Ritalin, Focalin. This was a new time. And I took it. I sat in the front row of the class in college. The only time I have ever fallen asleep in class was the day I took speed. Now, the professor knew me, so he shook me and he said, "Are you okay?" I mean, I got plenty of sleep, but I was on, and so any doctor that wants to listen to this, I was on 30 milligrams of dextroamphetamine. That was a single dose, and I was out cold. So a lot of these things, like you said, and this brings me back to what you had said, which was the right medication at the right time for the right diagnosis. And there is, when medications don't go well, so let's say somebody has bipolar, which I have. If you give me a SSRI, there's a high probability all of a sudden I'm going to be exploding and becoming manic, dangerous even. I could be a harm to myself, to others. So the medications, although they're being more accepted by the individuals, I feel like they are being more constrained and choked by the professionals because they are dealing with fear of litigation.
Yeah,
It's all about liability. And I totally get it. I really do. I would not want to work really hard to become a medical practitioner and have my license stripped because, of one medication. I really do understand it. But that shows there's this disconnect. We've worked so hard. When you said that you've seen like more people being accepting of medication, that made me happy because in my experiences, especially with little ones, there are so many of the parents that even though they're desperate, they hear these horror stories. Oh, I don't want my kid on speed. God, that's going to mess them up for forever. Or, I don't want to give them this, antipsychotic. I'd rather do it naturally because I've read this ridiculous article. There are certain things that cannot necessarily be dealt with just homeopathically. I'm sorry to say that to anyone out there that really believes that they can take, a supplement and it's going to cure schizophrenia or bipolar or OCD. There are all of our medications come from plants. So people need to understand that most of our medication comes from our world. So we compound them, but they are coming from natural sources. Our blood pressure medications are, we can go on a huge list, but there, in my experience, especially with different cultures, and you said we're living in a culture in America, I see Americans absolutely fine taking medication. As soon as I deal with children from a different culture, let's say the Middle East, India, India is a little more okay. Asia, not at all. It's medication. No, you don't do medication. My child is not sick. They're fine. They don't need any help. So when you said we kind of live in a sick culture, I think, we're making some strides towards making it okay to take medication. At the same time, I agree with you. We're pushing so hard that, I mean, kids are feeling so much pressure to just, well, yeah, they're all getting depressed. Well, and then what do? We feed them SSRIs. We feed them dopamine. We give them serotonin. They're getting enough from TV and telephones. And we are kind of, and you said it earlier where you were talking about it cures the symptoms, but not the cause. For me, I always felt like most of the medications I took, especially for some of the more powerful ones when I was dealing with the bipolar and before I had switched to treating my endocrine system, the main issue there was I was just wasted. I have been extremely drunk before. It doesn't even compare to olanzapine. If psychiatrists had to take the medications they prescribed for 2 weeks or 3 weeks before they prescribed it, they would never prescribe the medications. They have no idea. People who have not taken these medications have no clue what they do. And you gain weight. So these are really intense ones. So for most people listening to this podcast, I'm not trying to scare you. I am fine. I've been on some of the most intense medications known to man. I've been on all of them pretty much. The main point I want to bring out is that what we often see, or what I often felt as an individual and as somebody who was being medicated, was that what they saw for stability had nothing to do with what I call stability. I was not causing problems. I was unfunctional, so therefore I was good. I was unable to write my name on a college final. I understood the material. I was sitting there. My hand was shaking so bad I couldn't even write my name. What am I supposed to do? What is somebody supposed to do when they're on these massive, massive medications? And what we're supposed to be able to do school at the same level as everyone else? I had a 3.97 GPA cumulative. And that class, those medications, I still have a high GPA, but I took an F in that. I walked out of that final. I just felt hopeless. And there were so many times in my life that I did feel hopeless. There were many times in my life that those medications that are intense that I just talked about saved my life. So there is this fine balance between, again, being respectful of the medications, being mindful of them. We have to respect what they are. And I feel, especially when you're dealing with individuals and you have parents, it's very tempting as an individual to stop and discontinue the medication. Compliance is one of the most difficult things with mental health, because you start feeling better. I don't want these pills. I feel great. Or you start feeling worse. I don't want these pills. I stopped taking them. Every time I stopped or discontinued, I would throw off my treatment plan. So again, I want to reiterate, never discontinue. The process of working through the medications is daunting. You try one, it doesn't work. You try another one. I had one that made my tongue feel fuzzy, and I took another one, lamotrigine, and I was on a massive dose. So again, this is dosage. Most people take, around 75 milligrams, like I would say 250 as a common. I was on like 600 milligrams. And I would walk from the downstairs to the kitchen and I wouldn't remember why I was there. So I have dealt with all of them. What I can say to any person who has questions is that the medications are way better than what can happen if you're not on them.
All right, let me talk. I wanted to say, I see your point, but I'm going to give you a counterpoint. And the counterpoint is that our culture, our drug culture, is so bad. All drug companies give a damn about is making money. The more money they can make, they don't care about what it does to people. So drug companies are pushing every kind of drug imaginable, and that turns a lot of people off, and it turns me off too. I've taken medications for anxiety. I don't take them anymore. I didn't take them for very long, and they helped. But I am absolutely aghast at all. You turn TV on or turn on any device, and what you're going to hear or see or both is some medication. It's just for everything. Everyone is on medication. Everyone is on antidepressants, and they do have negative side effects. You've been arguing that the side effects of not taking medication are probably going to be worse than the side effects of not taking the medication. I would argue that it's not a black or white thing. I don't like that our culture is take a pill for anything and everything. I see why there's a reaction. I totally understand why people want to get away from what you call, I mean, the medication is exactly what you said. It's high concentrates of certain things from plants, but it's a drug culture. Take a pill and everything will get better, and that's what is pissing people off. Plus they also know that drug companies don't care at all, not a whit, about health or anything else. They just care about convincing people that they need to take medication or they won't fit in. So I'm not as anywhere near as pro medication as you are. I've taken less on, and I don't need as much or almost none at this point. But I don't like the fact that it's all about profit. No, I mean, and greed, really intense greed. Some of these medications that are so helpful, to take them for a month, it's $1,000 or 13
Yes.
bucks, and that's rape.
Oh, yeah.
These companies could sell them for $10 and make a profit. So it's basically a very, very evil culture. It's rapacious. It's mean. It doesn't care about individual people. It just cares about bottom line. And I question everything about this culture, particularly drugs. Um,
You, you
I
know,
just can't go along with what you're saying completely.
No, what I would agree with is if you look at our social media, it's the same thing. I mean, the congressional report on what Facebook was doing was quite clear. They knew harm was coming to young women and it was causing anorexia, depression, suicides. I mean, they know, but it was more important to make that bottom line. So, and I'm actually, the thing is I am pro medication for people who need it.
That's
And
both. But it's
and
mostly everyone at this point because the culture is so toxic, the stress is so real, the lack of meaningful relationships so intense that what we're doing in a lot of cases is medicating people so they don't feel bad. And I don't know. I mean, it makes people more compliant. It gives them a false sense of security. And I'm not going to argue with you that medication in some cases can be a lifesaver because I've seen it. But I've also seen the opposite because one of the problems with people on the spectrum of people with ADD is in order for the medication to work well, it has to be monitored carefully because especially with kids that are weight change
yes.
and nobody does it. Doctors, if they're, if you're a good doctor, a good shrink, you are going to be booked for a year and a half. No, you can't wait that long to get medication. So what happens is you lose communication. The medication is if it's done correctly and monitored, I'm sure it will help a lot. But it's not. It's almost never the case unless you're the really, really close with the doctor, with the professional. So everything is wrong with our medical system. Everything. There's not one thing that works. It's all broken. And
You know, I would say, with it's in my personal experience, and if anyone's curious, I was asked to write a memoir about my recovery because I'm I believe the first medically um, documented case of full remission of bipolar 1, utilizing the medication I do. I don't want to get into what it is because I don't want people, misusing something or doing it without a doctor's help. But what I want to say is that when I was on that, and all of a sudden I started coming off some of these other heavy ones, it was like all of a sudden, whoa, my goodness, I can think again. Wow, I can walk downstairs by myself. People do not understand,
yeah,
because I have not really talked much about it, but there were times where I literally had to have, my dad and mom help carry me down the stairs because I was so drugged up, I could not walk. Now, the thing is that I was in some pretty terrifying states, and mania is no joke. So if someone is truly bipolar 1 and I was manic, you do not want somebody in that state. I was danger.
sure.
So, you know, that is where I would say the medications, if someone is really, really, truly out of it, then of course, but
Worth it.
I before I jump into that, I do want to say that, there are things that we know for sure that help. Vitamin D. We know exercise. We know getting to bed in the golden hour, before 10 o'clock, getting a full 8 hours of sleep. We know that exercise each day, I mean, good, healthy diet, all of those things, even fish oil, we know those help stabilize moods. They help lift our moods. And for anyone struggling, I always advocate utilizing those things, because if you do need medication, you want the lowest possible dose.
Yeah.
In my experience, the lower I could go where I still got some effect, that was what I was aiming for. And it's there. And like you said, there's literally no perfect solution. There's no one medication for everybody. There's no, what I'm frustrated with is in my from my viewpoint, some of the ones that I work with are very reticent to even look or see that their child might have a problem. There's somebody I can think of right now, and they've been told flat out their child has a diagnosis, and they're like, no, they don't. And I'm like, okay, I mean, you have to be willing to face what the truth is. And then what you do is you take that step and you go, okay, don't look at online and read about medications, because you're just going to get terrified. Talk to your doctor, research it appropriately, and take the steps with what I would consider not necessarily slow steps. I would say cautious. It means you want to be trusting of your doctor. You want to move through the process, but you do want to take your time, because if you jump on the wrong medication, and Jeffrey, you said it so well, the right time, the right medication, and then following up. So you want your family to understand, when you do start taking medication, it's not just one person's job to take it. The whole group and unit needs to help there, because and for me, I can give this tip right away. I was not happy taking medication, and I knew it. So what I told my mom to do, and I asked her, I said, there's no way I'm going to follow through with the medication. So I was like, would you wake me up really early in the morning. So I'm like super groggy, hand me the pills. I'll just chug them. I'll go back to sleep. It worked. So communicate. And if you do have to take the medications, have somebody in your family that you can talk to about it, and don't take offense every time your family asks you, oh, did you take medication? They're asking that question because they care. And yes, it gets really offensive when every time I have like a bad day, even it
Take your
doesn't happen anymore. Yeah, did you take your medication? I'm like, no, somebody just shouted at me on the phone. I wasn't happy about that. So, those things, those comments, and then there are a couple other things with medications where people get on them and they use them as a crutch. So for ADHD, I've had a lot of individuals I've worked with where they use the medication. And then what happens is, like, when it starts wearing off, it's like an instant excuse. They don't even have to do anything. Oh, I can't. I'm sorry, my medication, I can't. It's like, what? No, you're supposed to use the medication to help you learn how to retrain your brain. I really believe, and anyone listening to this, you can jump back to one of our podcasts that we did about neuroplasticity. It's We can change how our brain functions. And
a little.
I'm a big believer in, if you do find the right medication, you find the right psychiatrist or the right person to talk to, it doesn't, whatever you need, when everything lines up, you have the opportunity to kind of slowly start. And yes, there are some genetic factors that we can't get rid of. We can't completely remove or change certain aspects, but we can certainly enhance our ability to deal with them. So um it, if you had to give one tip to a parent that is looking at this, so they have a child that's been diagnosed with something and they have a whole host of medications and things, what would be your piece of advice for them? And I know that's not an easy question.
No, I'm not going to answer that question directly because I don't feel qualified to answer it. You're way better. I mean, I trust your answer better than mine, but I will say this, and I'll be my last comment. Um, when 20 or 25% of the population is taking medication, okay, that's probably too high, but it's reasonable. In our culture, it's probably over 50% that are on some kind of stress relief medication, or on some people are on 10 or 12, and that's just ridiculous. Um, so I mean, we disagree a lot on this topic. I much more believe that organic stuff, if you're hypersensitive, as most of the people I work with are, the additives and all kinds of stuff they put in foods and water. Yeah, um, you're probably going to need to take something. But I guess the point is, when over half the population is on some kind of psychotropic medication, it's something is wrong with that culture. Something is wrong with that society. And let's not forget that. All that being said, if you do have something like bipolar, or autism or ADD, medication can be a lifesaver. It is, I mean, it's there for a good reason, but it's abused in a culture it doesn't like talk therapy. Talk therapy should be included in any of this stuff. It's not going to solve it, but that in the right medication will make things a lot better. And most people don't do it. The fact that we have a culture that, thinks it's fine to go through life medicated and sort of accepts that worries me too. So my guess is, my thing is, if you have to take medication or your child does, really be a researcher. Don't just trust the internet. Don't just trust people's experience, experiential stuff. Just really research it. It's really significant. It could be a lifesaver, but it could also be the opposite.
See, right there. I fully agree. And one of the biggest issues that I have is, and here's where, I have to be an advocate, uh, just for the people that need it. But
Yeah,
I absolutely agree with you that, someone who's a little stressed out and does not have generalized anxiety, they do not have an anxiety that is getting in the way of their life. That is not somebody who should be prescribed medication. Talk therapy, what you just said, cognitive behavioral therapy, working out, getting on the right habits, those things should always be tried first and
not
foremost.
yeah.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And like you said, like with 12 medications, the problem is that one of the medications I would take would make my hands shake. So then I would take another medication to make my hands stop shaking. Well, then that would make me too hot or me sweat. Then I had to take, use this antiperspirant medication that was like burning my skin. And then that
Yep.
did something else. So I had a lotion. Pretty soon I'm like going through a regiment of 6,000 different medications. It's tiresome. So I still am on, a couple of them. One, because I'm just afraid if I stop taking it, I don't ever want the bipolar to come back. No one knows. No one's ever been on the medication that I have been for this long. No one in history. So there are so many unknowns on my end. And what I do want people to understand is what you just said, that it is absolutely imperative. The medication is a very important, if you're going to go that route. I loved what you said. For me, I understand that most likely 10 years, 15 years have been cut off my life from medication. I don't think people understand that. And one of the medications I have to take for an autoimmune disease, that one literally kills all my nerves in my legs.
Ooh.
I mean, it is not fun being on medications that are going to kill you, that you can't get off, that, and some of them that you don't want to stop. I mean, there are so many negatives, there's so many positives. It needs to be an individualized solution. And I think my main point, and the one thing I want to leave out there, is that it is the medical field's duty. It is their responsibility to look everywhere. And that does mean looking at, medicinal marijuana. That does mean looking at psychedelics. They're doing it, but it means looking everywhere, being open-minded, and working with your patient. Don't be so scared. Your oath was to protect and do no harm. So please do not harm your patients by making them feel shamed. Don't yank them off one medication because you're worried about your license. If they've been diligent, please follow through. So this is me speaking as a patient and pleading with medical professionals in this world to have an open mind, an open dialogue with your patient. We are more than just some number. We are a person, and we feel, we hurt, we are scared. And it is fair for us to understand that we have some say on what medications we can have and what medications we don't want. And I think that is a very valid statement for people that are dealing with mental health, because I have been forced so many times to do different medications or whatever else. And I never felt like I ever had a say, except with Dr. Simon, who, was the reason. And you know what? That's probably one reason why I'm actually good. So that is my thing. And it's my issue that I deal with. I know there's a lot of people out there that probably feel like I do. So just understand there's a lot of hope. It's a process. And I wanted to do this show. This is a hot topic. And Jeffrey, thank you for I really liked everything that you said, because there's no reason that we should have the percentage we do. And that also tells us that there's other issues at play, because I know there's a lot of people that are drinking. I think a lot of alcoholics are probably dealing with anxiety and they're self-medicating. I think there's a lot of people out there that you see the opiate epidemic. I think it's the same thing, escaping the world. So if we want to look at what's causing all of this, humans are social media, pressure. So the world, I really agree. I think the culture, we are too stressed. We need to change some of that if we want to actually see more success with medications, number one, and two, less people on medications. So Jeffrey, I actually agree with everything you said. I thought that was a brilliant job. So thank you very much for that. That's again, a very important topic, and I'm very passionate about it. So yeah, it's thank you. So everybody listening, please feel free. You can give some comments if you want us to follow up with a show with a pharmacist or an MD. We'd be happy to do that. And we're going to be having some guests coming as well. I don't want to spoil anything by saying who they are, but it should be fun. So thank you all for listening. Please share the podcast with somebody you know would benefit from it. And when it comes to these discussions, please understand, it should be something open-ended. It should be done with love, not fear. So I'll leave it with that. Jeffrey, do you have anything to add?
One thing, I also despair that for the average person, they go to an HMO, and what happens is they see a doctor for 10 minutes or 8 minutes or 7. The doctors are forced to, put them through that assembly line. So that most people will never get individualized attention by a doctor. They're just going to be given a quick bum's rush. And that's tragic. That's just so sad. And we need so many more people who are competent to go into that field, because nobody's doing it. It's such a stressful field. And for every person suffering from mental disorders, there should be a decent doctor who cares about them and really wants to help them. And I think many doctors really do, but they can't. The system won't allow it.
That needed to be said. I agree. The doctors do. We need more of them. And I think there are too many barriers to entry between college costs, between years spent. And honestly, one of my biggest things, and we can talk about this later, I feel one of the reasons we're missing out on having, doctors that think very differently and approach this differently is because if you are having these problems, you can't get through medical school. Nope. It's not on the drugs I was on. So, I do want to say all of the doctors I've ever dealt with are amazing and they're trying. There are times when, and the things I said, I didn't mean to offend any doctors. So thank you for adding that in there. But it's hard. So I have learned to, like you said, research. Please, we'll probably break this up into 2 parts, and if we maybe do a follow-up, but thanks for adding that in. Everyone, thank you for listening. We'll be back the following week. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Chaos2Cured podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with everyone you know. And definitely like, follow, and subscribe. Certainly leave a comment if you'd like. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about the next time. Also, in our show notes, there should be direct links where you can follow us on our social media, as well as reach out to us directly. Thanks again, and have a great day. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on Chaos2Cured podcast are the speaker's own. All discussion is based on our own experiences. We do not and cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information. Chaos2Cured podcast cannot give medical or health advice. All discussion is based upon our personal experiences and meant for general and educational purposes. This podcast is not a substitute for professional help or for diagnostic purposes for yourself or another. Chaos2Cured podcast always encourages you to consult an appropriate professional.